1 week season.
Welcome to Solo Ship Week 16. I'm Squirrel Patrol. I'm joined by JM to win from 1 week season. JM, we are getting into the last few weeks of the NFL season, and I feel like the last few weeks of the NFL season are always a little bit different. But I guess, before we get into that, how was your Week 15?
Week 15 was a really nice week for the OWS community. Didn't come together for me. So, you know how that goes. It's like, well, that's positive. I like that. Could have liked it more if it all came together for me. You put us on to Brenton Strange. So I'm guessing did things come together on your end? Not enough.
I played, it was my biggest discrepancy of playing like more on FanDuel than DraftKings because FanDuel had the fan championship. I had a bunch of tickets to that. And so then I put, not as much into DraftKings. I didn't have a live final seat. And I had, of course, after complaining about the Millie Maker the week before, I think I max entered the $20 Millie Maker and I got like over $2,900 back, which means if it had been a smaller field, I would have had an excellent week. I think I put together 5 or 6 single entry rosters and one of them did really well. So I got, a bunch of my winnings in single entry and 10Xs were pretty good on DraftKings. And overall, profitable week, which you can't complain about. I just wish that my entry fees had been flipped between FanDuel and DraftKings, but it is what it is. And, still a pretty good NFL season so far and still a little bit more to go. Speaking of which, we've got 11 games on DraftKings this week, 12 on FanDuel, and it is the time of year where weather starts to be a thing. So I think some, nothing that's necessarily going to be dramatic, but I got Chicago, Washington, and Cincinnati as could be cold, could be rainy kind of weather. And then also we're just at the time of the year where some teams are good teams that have something to play for still at this point in the season, and some teams are not. And we've got a kind of a mix and match of the games where, some lopsided lines. We've also got some games can be highly competitive, but not necessarily that high scoring because both teams just really want to win. I guess any initial thoughts on the week and any game environments that stand out to you as something you want to target?
Yeah, this week feels wide open to me. I had to do a second and third pass at running back to be okay, I've got a large running back pool, but who are the real sharpest ones of this bunch? Same thing at quarterback. I got a large quarterback pool. Who are the real sharpest ones of this bunch? And then because of the structure, the nature of how I'm building, I'm going running back first on hand builds, running back, tight end, quarterback, and then that dictates some of my wide receiver positions. So then what's left at wide receiver is really dictated by salary and what I've done elsewhere on my roster. So I'm not trying super hard to narrow down my wide receiver pool, but that's also pretty broad. And I think it's because, like you said, there's quite a few games that could be competitive, but do we see a Lions and Bills, a potential Lions Bills game, a potential Bills Rams game, a potential Bengals Ravens game? I don't see that on this slate. I think we could see games where a team scores 30, maybe even a game where both teams score 30. I think it's unlikely. But I don't think we're seeing games where, we're getting up into the 40s or high 30s or anything like that. So yeah, that's kind of how I see the game environments this week.
Yeah, to be honest, there's nothing that really stood out to me when I was looking through the games, and I always kind of read through the 1 week season write-ups, and I've got positional notes. I'll write down any quarterbacks that stand out to me, running backs, wide receivers, and I had this list of running backs that's really long, and then nothing at quarterback and wide receiver, and I'm oh, this is shaping up to be a little bit of a weird week. We do have, as often again happens, as we get late in the season, we do have some running back value. We've got Patrick Taylor taking over in San Francisco as they get onto their fourth running back of the year. And Jahmyr Gibbs probably getting this big workload in Detroit. I think Gibbs in particular on DraftKings is going to be very popular just because he's the perception is, and probably the reality is he's going to get he's a very talented running back on a good offense. He's going to get more of the running back share than he usually does. I guess any thoughts on the running back value?
Yeah, no, I think Patrick Taylor sharp. It seems like people are still treating it like it's going to potentially be a timeshare, which isn't Shanahan's MO. And Patrick Taylor's been ahead of Keyshawn Vaughn this whole time. So I'm comfortable treating it like he's stepping in, the Gibbs thing. Yeah, I think the perception's probably a little bit skewed, but I've been playing Gibbs relentlessly this year at a smaller role, and part of the value there is that people aren't on him and he has this high ceiling. But yeah, like I think that the rise in role, the rise in ownership, like it all kind of evens out. Like he's still a very sharp play. Like last year he had a game where it was like 86% snap rate, and then another with like 70%, another around 60%. Saw like 20, 20, and 31 touches in these games without Montgomery. So what's likeliest, is that he plays about 70, 75% of the snaps and sees, 20 to 24, 25 touches. But yeah, certainly possible for him to see like 30 touches. So I think like realistically, we play out this slate 100 times. I think Saquon outscores Jahmyr Gibbs way more than 50% of the time, right? But I also think that Gibbs is a very sharp play. So to me, it's like Saquon first, Gibbs second. I've got Saquon as a blue chip play, and Gibbs is a light blue chip. But yeah, I really like both these backs.
Interesting. So yeah, actually, I should point out, I think there's a big difference between FanDuel and DraftKings this week. Patrick Taylor on FanDuel, I think is 4,800. He's much cheaper. He's the equivalent of 4,000 on DraftKings. And I probably want to be over the field on Patrick Taylor on DraftKings, and I think on FanDuel he's going to be very highly owned. But I think on FanDuel it's almost like a Zach Charbonnet situation. On DraftKings, I don't think Patrick Taylor is like necessary or something like the first building block put into your roster or anything like that. And actually, like Gibbs is somebody that I think he might see extremely high ownership. Like the ownership projections are very high on him. I might be at or just a little bit under the field. And it's weird because I think on DraftKings, like Jahmyr Gibbs might be my highest owned running back. I might be under the field on him. So it's one of those situations where like I can see paths to failure. He's 7,500. Like I could see like Chase Brown, HN, James Conner outscoring him, and suddenly he's not on the winning roster. And that's what we're trying to find. But I don't know. Like he's going to project the best. He's going to be one of my higher owned running backs, but I'm not as excited about it as playing him into really high ownership as I was, say, for like a mispriced running back like Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great way to put it. Like he's not super mispriced, and early ownership projections were like as high as 35%. When usually those things climb deeper into the week. Like he's going to end up being projecting for 35, but actually being like 45 or 50. And realistically, I think what you said is a perfect way to look at it. Like he'll probably be your highest owned running back, and you'll probably be underweight the field, not because you're going out of your way to be underweight the field, but just because that's not quite the level at which like he might necessarily warrant being owned. So yeah, I think he's a really sharp play, just not as sharp as the field is going to treat him as. I will say, like you brought up the Patrick Taylor on DraftKings thing. I think it's interesting to talk about the pricing overlap at the running back position and wide receiver position, because we know like you're less likely to get a 44 pointer or a 54 pointer from a running back than you are a wide receiver. So, it's often plus EV to chase those high priced wide receivers. But we look at this week's slate, like Jamar Chase is in a game with, DTR on the other side. We know Jamar Chase like has a long history with Zach Taylor as the head coach, with Joe Burrow as quarterback. He has a long history of hitting in shootouts and not hitting in non-shootouts, right? And then you got Justin Jefferson, who's only hit once all season. You got Puka, who, consistently scoring 20 plus. He's capable of scoring way over that, but, his likeliest score in this game is 20-ish points. Amon-Ra St. Brown against a really good pass defense, where the Lions could control this game. Like you go on down the line, it's like, am I super excited about any of these wide receivers? Then I think it makes sense to play two high-priced running backs. And then if you play Patrick Taylor in the flex, you're comparing him to these like 15 wide receivers in the 5K price range, low 6K price range, who all look good, right? And you're basically saying Patrick Taylor outscores those wide receivers. So I do think it makes a lot of sense this week to say like, yeah, Patrick Taylor's a sharp play. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to prioritize him, because you can go double pay up running back, avoid the high priced wide receivers, go to kind of the mid-range wide receivers is a perfectly fine way to build.
Yeah, actually, I think there's an argument for like avoiding running backs in the flex position early in the season, and then like at some point it shifts to being okay, it's acceptable, because you start to get these mispriced running backs. Pricing is set, somebody's injured, and suddenly like you're getting a guy that's like much cheaper than he should be, and you should be comparing him to like the wide receivers in that price range, like the tight ends in that price range. I generally I don't do anything to like change my like settings, but I think I probably end up with a lot more running backs in the flex as the season goes on, just because the injuries pile up. I was actually wondering about Jahmyr Gibbs because like in single entry, and maybe like, there's actually an argument that maybe you should be under the field on him in single entry because the ownership will probably be much higher, and I don't think he's somebody that like is necessarily. I think he's probably the safest play at that price. But I think there's a bunch of guys like right around him. I mentioned like Chase Brown, Etienne, James Conner, Jonathan Taylor. Like any of these guys could outscore Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is probably the one most likely to like put up a good score for his price. But like not playing Jahmyr Gibbs in single entry this week, I think is sane and would get you immediately much different, from probably 40% or more of the field potentially. So that's like just a thought that occurred to me. Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to see him like failing, like he probably scores 22 even in a bad game. So I don't know how much edge we gain moving away from him because you would need your guy to put up 30, which most of these guys don't, but I do think it's totally it is totally viable to envision a path to a win without Gibbs. And because of how high owned he is, like you said, it might even be plus EV to say, just avoid Gibbs on some of these single entry rosters. I don't honestly see it as like a major decision point because it's like I don't think Gibbs is I think Gibbs is the likeliest to put up 30 plus of him and Achane and Bijan Robinson and Chase Brown, but like he probably doesn't. I think that all these guys probably get over 20. And so, yeah, I don't know that there's massive edge gained at this spot, but I also think like the field is overrating the chances of Gibbs just like running away as the best running back in this range.
So when you started talking about wide receivers, you actually mentioned the first guy I wanted to talk about was Jamar Chase. I have very conflicting Jamar Chase feelings this week because Cleveland allows the most yards per catch in the NFL. I think Jamar Chase has like the second highest like receiving yards prop compared. I think it's right after Puka, and they're kind of 88 and like 90. I think he's got the best touchdown odds. That was all true like last week as well. Is there like a Jamar Chase like contract situation? Like, is it because he hasn't done well in non shootouts, right? But could this be different? And he hasn't done well, like Joe Burrow hasn't done well against Cleveland. Like, could this be different? Could this just be a different year? And they're trying to get Jamar Chase's numbers, but they are still in the playoff push as well. So I get your thoughts on Jamar Chase.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland has given up the most yards per catch, right? They've also given up the second fewest catches to wide receivers because like they're good but aggressive, and then that aggressiveness leads to big plays. I'm not gonna be like, don't play Jamar Chase. I'm not playing him though. What's scary when you don't play him? What's scary is you see the 44 pointer, you see the 58 pointer, you see the 48 pointer. That's it, right? He's got a 32 pointer, but everything else is 20s and teens. But you see the 48 pointer, but that wasn't really a shootout, but it was 27-20 game against Dallas. It was competitive throughout. He saw 18 targets. And then the other two were against Baltimore, right? Where it's super high scoring against that Baltimore secondary. So yeah, if Chase beats me, I'm okay with it. And that's been my sort of mindset with Chase all along, right? It's been like games against Baltimore, games against Kansas City, other shootouts have always been where Chase hits because that's where the Bengals change the way they play. And we just happen to have a year this year where the Bengals are so bad on defense that we're getting a lot of shootouts. I just don't trust DTR and Cleveland to do that. So then the question is like, yeah, do they just decide, hey, we're going to keep throwing? Maybe, maybe. I'll tell you what, the Broncos losing was a big deal because the Bengals play the Broncos next week. And so if the Bengals win, now they're 2 games behind the Broncos with a game against the Broncos next week, and they win that one and have the tiebreaker over the Broncos. Like they still have a path, and the Broncos are playing the Chiefs in week 18. Who knows if the Chiefs have anything to play for at that point, but the Bengals still have a path to the playoffs. So, I mean, I think that's their main focus here is, hey, let's win this week. Because now if we take care of business next week, we just need the Broncos to lose to the Chiefs and we control our destiny. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly a pathway to a big game from Chase, but that's not kind of where I'm looking this week.
So, one spend up that you said you do like Saquon Barkley. I guess a little bit of a surprise to me. Like Saquon's not necessarily, I think he's my favorite play from that game. It strikes me as it might just be like a lower scoring, like close divisional game, right? Like Washington and Philadelphia both have a lot to play for. I feel like Washington might just try to slow the game down. Like Washington's best chances of winning might be slow the game down and have it come down to one play. if they can. Um, I guess like I kind of in the same price range. I kind of prefer Bijan Robinson, which is interesting. And I was thinking about like I know Tyler Algier is there, but I was like thinking I think Bijan's chances of getting like more of the work from Tyler Algier are probably like better than Saquon's chances of putting up like a standout game where he gets the touchdowns instead of like Jalen Hurts. I mean, I think it's close. I guess like your thought process for liking Saquon and any thoughts on Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, no, I like Bijan. So for me, Saquon's got 5 games this year that's outscored the best game from every other running back on this slate. And he's 200 more than Bijan Robinson, and he's 600 more than Chase Brown, and he's 800 more than Jahmyr Gibbs. So I'll start with this. Like usually when we get into a discussion like this, where it's like because you're not like deep in the research and you just have a great feel for things. And usually when you're just looking at the slate and you're like, I kind of see things this way. And I'm like, well, like from my research and logic, I'm seeing this. Usually you're the one who ends up being right. Okay. But like, I see it like, I think that underestimates how good the Eagles is and overestimates how good Washington is. Like the Eagles are like the Washington is like the 7th, 8th, maybe 9th best team in the NFC. The Eagles might be the best team in the NFL. Like the Eagles are way better than Washington. And we've got, since the bye, 40% of Eagles games, Saquon's gone for 29 plus points. And 40% of Eagles games, Jalen Hurts has gone for 29 plus points. There's a pretty good chance that one of these two guys goes for 29 plus points because it's such a concentrated offense. The offense should perform well. So to me, like I think that Hurts and Saquon are just extremely sharp ways to attack this slate. And I think that I don't think that Washington needs to keep this close. I don't think that the Eagles defense is so good that I don't think it's possible to just be like, hey, let's just kind of slow things down against this team. I think that the Eagles are going to score points when they have the ball, and they're going to force Washington to be aggressive. And then if they're turning Washington over because Washington's getting too aggressive, then that just plays even more into the favor of these two guys. So no, I mean, I think that the chance of one or the other of these two players hitting is the same as always this week.
Yeah, I'll say that my thoughts on the game are a little bit different on FanDuel because like on FanDuel you have much more salary to work with this week if you're playing Patrick Taylor, which I think is a good play. And so like I don't think I'll be playing a lot of Jalen Hurts on DraftKings, but I think I'll be playing a lot more of them on FanDuel because it's more touchdown dependent, and then you also have more salary to work with. A lot of the quarterbacks we're seeing on DraftKings in terms of projected ownership this week are the value guys. We're seeing Michael Penix, Anthony Richardson, Caleb Williams. One of the things that like maybe leading me a little bit more to Bijan Robinson is I think it makes more sense for the Falcons to like rely on Bijan against the Giants than like Michael Penix is making his first start. Any thoughts on the value quarterbacks? Any of the guys you really like in that price range?
Yeah, I think that Anthony Richardson has like in terms of what's going to win us the most money over time. I think it's Anthony Richardson because like all these other value quarterbacks, whether it's Mac Jones, Aiden O'Connell, Mason Rudolph, Michael Penix, how often are they putting up 25 plus points, right? So Richardson, he's got the low floor, but he can put up 27 or 30 or whatever. Who's the next likeliest to put up 27 to 30? I'd say Caleb Williams, because we expect the Lions to do well because they always do. And the Lions defense is so beat up. And, Caleb Williams has had these flashes of good play. And so, I think that those two stand out. And then you got this tier of, to me, guys you're betting on because you're saying no high price quarterback hits. Nobody puts up 30 points at the high end. And then Caleb Williams has 16 points and Anthony Richardson has 13 points, in which case just getting like 18 to 20 to 22 from a cheap guy is what you need, right? And so in that bucket is Mason Rudolph and Drew Lock and Mac Jones and Aiden O'Connell and Michael Penix. And of that group, I would feel safest with Michael Penix, but I don't think, here's the thing, right? Like next week, speaking of playoff stuff, next week, the Falcons play the Commanders. You would expect that the Commanders are going to lose this game, right? All of a sudden, Falcons and Commanders next week, the winner of that takes control of the 7th seed, right? If the Falcons win that, they have the same record as Washington and the tiebreaker. So like the Falcons can't just say, well, let's just ease Penix in. Like they have to say, look, we've got a big game next week. If we win that game, we've got a playoff run ahead of us. And so I do think I don't think that they're going to try to win this game like they did in week 15, where they're like, all right, Cousins, throw the ball 17 times. And we're just going to run it with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Like, I think that they actually need to throw it 25 to 28 times, even if they're in control of this game. But I also don't think they're going to throw it 37 times. I don't think he's throwing for 300 yards. I don't think he's throwing for 3 touchdowns. So I kind of look at him as like, of all the guys who probably get you 16 to 20, he's like the safest bet of the bunch and the cheapest of the bunch. So I kind of look at him like that. Like if Richardson doesn't, if Hurts doesn't hit, Richardson doesn't hit, Caleb Williams doesn't hit, who's putting up 30? Probably nobody. So Penix can put up 18 and help us on our way to a tournament win.
Yeah, he is even cheaper than the other cheap quarterbacks. Like he's 4,500. I probably like Anthony Richardson the most, like you said, and then probably Caleb Williams. And I think that Richardson has those rushing yards. I think it's like 5 out of his last 6 games, he's got 45 rushing yards or more. Like that's 4.5 points you're adding to his score, and he's only 5,400. This guy was, I think, the chalk quarterback in week 1 at a much higher price tag. I think he was like 6,300. So yeah, those just the scoring system like leads me to Anthony Richardson. Caleb Williams, the Detroit defense is pretty banged up. And I actually really like the idea. So if I'm playing a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs, Caleb Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then put in like DJ Moore. And then that's like a nice little game stack. And then I can just even have that just be the game stack from the game. It's going to obviously project well because of like Jahmyr Gibbs and Caleb Williams is pretty cheap. And then I can maybe fit in like another game stack. You mentioned Mason Rudolph, and I was looking at him and I was looking at that game, and I'm like, well, actually makes some sense. I think I'm going to be playing some Mason Rudolph this week, and I don't mind running that opposite like a Jonathan Taylor, right? Like Jonathan Taylor gets the rushing instead of Anthony Richardson. So then maybe you're kind of knocking off some of the Anthony Richardson teams, and then Calvin Ridley, where the ball is going to potentially go if Mason Rudolph is having a good game. And you just have like these little like skinny stacks. I think it might be a week for me of a lot of like skinny stacks, like centered around running backs of all things, maybe more so than the quarterback. And I will say, if I'm spending up for a quarterback, I may actually be spending up for Joe Burrow. But I think we probably just feel differently about the Cincinnati Cleveland game.
Yeah, which is fair.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess any games like that we didn't touch on that you just I think deserve mentioning. There are some teams with some high implied point totals, and it's interesting because that's like one of the things that is most like predictive of fantasy points. Like the team with the highest implied point total, I think, is Buffalo. I don't know if I'll be playing a Buffalo player, like on shorter, on smaller field, like single entry type stuff. I don't know if I'll go to a Buffalo player at all, like any of the other like kind of high powered offenses that you're interested in.
Yeah, no, Buffalo, good shout to at least touch on that. Josh Allen went 9 games without cracking 30 points. Josh Allen's broken the slate back-to-back weeks, and Khalil Shakir has the best wide receiver score at 24.6 and the second best at 15.9, right? Like pass catchers just aren't putting up tournament winning scores in this offense. And then the running backs, it's 3 guys, right? So like James Cook has hit 3 times this year, but when he misses so much harder than other running backs priced around him, and his hits like aren't really separating. So I think it's totally viable to just stay away from that offense. I do wonder if a game like Minnesota and Seattle could end up shooting out. There are the Rams and the Jets, has a chance for some scoring, but I don't see it. I don't see any of these like pushing me toward these spots as priorities this week. Like it just, like you said, it feels like a week where you kind of make running back decisions and then like skinny stacks and then kind of fill out the roster from there. To me, I think the tight end position is critical because I think Trey McBride is a really sharp play. And there's also a chance that Brock Bowers or Kittle or Jonnu Smith outscores him and puts up a really nice score. And I also, this pairing of, don't need to dig into it here because I touched on it in my other 2 podcasts, but this pairing of Austin Hooper and Hunter Henry is just a really sharp pairing. Like the whole offense is flowing through those 2. And you basically like across their last 5 games, they're basically putting up Puka Nakua's scores at 7.2K in combined salary. You cover 2 spots, 2 cheap spots where most people are going to, fail to get 25 points from 2 cheap players. And that's another way to play the tight end position. So I think that like tight end position gives us a lot to work with. Running back gives us like some really sharp plays and sharp ways to build. And then from there, it's kind of like, okay, what's my skinny stack and what do I do with these final wide receiver spots?
Yeah, I really do think, and almost every week that I played NFL DFS, like my week and my lineups start with like a list of quarterbacks, and it's basically indicative of like game environments. Like I think this game environment can take off, and I might start this week with a list of running backs, and then play the opposing quarterback, and then now I'm pairing him with a wide receiver, and I might be centering my rosters this week around the running backs. You mentioned the Jets Rams game. And my notes on that game is that it actually has a wide range of outcomes depending on the psychology of Aaron Rodgers. That and it could actually be talked into like a overstack or a big game stack from this game. Like Puka, I think has the highest yardage prop for a wide receiver this week. If you're not playing Jamar Chase and you've got the money to spend, I think like Puka makes some sense. And like, what if the Jets are really just throwing the ball around? Because they don't really care, anymore. I guess, thoughts on a game stack from that game.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were on Devontae Adams last week, and Pappy even got, his write up in the scroll got me onto Aaron Rodgers, stacks as like I talked all week about Devontae Adams, and then it was like, oh yeah, you can actually throw Aaron Rodgers in there as well. I think that this is like exactly like you said. I think at this point in the season, their season's over. They're going to be gone next year. Like he and Devontae Adams clearly have their connection back working at this point. They're just like, let's keep putting up stats. And so, and obviously trying to spoil this Rams season. The Rams capable of putting up points. Jets defense has not been good. So I think it's a very interesting spot. Again, is it going to become a 42 to 38 point game? No, probably not. But I think it could be like 32 to 27 or something like that. And we could get some really nice scores from this game.
Yeah, I guess we should be pointed out that's the $2.5 million winner from last week was Aaron Rodgers, I think double stack with two wide receivers running it back. Chipotle Addict chose that as the stack he wanted to win the DraftKings Live final with this year. I guess one more game I wanted to touch on, Carolina and Arizona, is actually one other game and environment. I kept kind of adding pieces that I thought were interesting. Like, well, actually, all these pieces are in the same game. Chuba Hubbard, like not my favorite running back, but I think he's a running back you can play. James Conner actually going up against the Carolina rush defense, probably in a good spot. Like Trey McBride, if I'm going to spend up for a tight end, like that's the tight end I'd want to spend up for. And Trey McBride been putting up pretty good tight end scores for his price without scoring a touchdown. Like the touchdown will probably come at some point. Is that a game I think that you're interested in, and how would you maybe stack up that game?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in it. The Cardinals aren't a great offense, but they're good enough, right? And the Panthers, I think that because of what happened against the Cowboys last week, people are like, oh, the Panthers are bad. But you go back to Leggett dropping that what would have been the game-winning touchdown against the Eagles, and then losing in overtime to the Bucks, and then losing on a last-second field goal to the Chiefs, and then winning their two games before that. Like realistically, the Panthers probably keep this game close and competitive throughout, where the Cardinals are going to have to play their offense the whole game, right? And it's all going to flow through James Conner and Trey McBride. And, you mentioned the touchdowns. Like this is now something that the Cardinals are talking about publicly. And that last week they were trying to get Trey McBride a touchdown. And so it's a matter of time before, Kyler's never thrown a touchdown to Trey McBride. And so we're reaching this point where, yeah, not only is it probably going to happen, but they're going to try to force it. And they might try to get him two touchdowns, So I think Trey McBride's a really sharp way to go on this slate. I think James Conner is one of those where, we play him all the time, right? You and I, where it's like, yeah, he's boring. He's probably not winning you a tournament, but you're always going to get like 17 to 24 points. And every once in a while, he can get you 30. He hasn't done it in a while, but he can get you 30. And now we've got like rising price tag coming off a 33-pointer, rising ownership. Like the DFS player in me immediately wants to be like, well, I'm not playing James Conner. And then you think through that enough and you're like, no, he's actually a really sharp play. Like even though the ownership's going to inflate expectations, he's actually still a sharp play in this spot where he probably gets you 23, 24, can get you 30 plus. So yeah, I'm with you on those plays. I even think, Marvin Harrison Jr. not really seeing more than 6 or 7 targets most games, but at his price tag, he's capable of hitting. And then the Panthers, we've got 4 games in a row of a wide receiver from the Panthers scoring 20 plus. Right? It was David Moore, 2 games of Thielen, 1 game of Coker. David Moore's got the concussion. Legette's out. So Thielen and Coker, will it surprise us if one of those two guys scores 20? No. So yeah, I think it's an interesting game all the way around.
Yeah, I'm actually, because I think there's some Yeah, I think Coker is listed as questionable. So that's actually something we want to keep an eye on because they could be really down to like Adam Thielen. And I get potentially get dinged up Jalen Coker, but yeah, I think either of the Panthers wide receivers would be in play. Like it's a team that's like perennially cheap. So yeah, it's a game environment that I'm interested in. That about wraps it up for the week. Any closing thoughts?
No, Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, everybody, and we will see you guys next week.